Welcome to Paris, Chris Claremont.
Thank you.
So on our podcast, we like to introduce writers and artists who have the pleasure to visit our nice country and city. So in a few words, obviously your area of expertise is very large. Would you like to describe yourself and your beginnings and career in the comic book industry, maybe?
Sheer dumb luck. In the very beginning, my college would shut down from the 1st of January to essentially the 1st of March, and would send its students out for what was called field period, where the expectation was we would get jobs related to our field of ambition, achievement. Well, at that time, my ambition was to be a political theorist. My giggle was to try and be an actor. But this was 68. And to be a political theorist in a left-wing focused school was not a positive field, since Richard Nixon had just been elected. And America was in a state of tumult, surprisingly analogous to today. And so I looked at my second field, which was acting. Not a lot of jobs for acting in New York in the beginning of the year. They usually wait a little later. But I liked comics. I liked reading. I liked writing. And my parents were very good friends with an writer-artist named Al Jaffe, who worked for Mad Magazine, who is, to my mind, one of the great humorists of modern comics. If anyone here is listening is familiar with Mad Magazine and looked at the fold-back covers, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. So I thought, I would love to spend 2 months working for Mad Magazine. And Al's response to my parents was, no way. Do you have any idea what we do there? So he said, but I understand Chris likes comics. Yeah? Yeah. Well, I'll call a friend and see what that could do. So the next thing I know, the phone rings and Stanley is, hi there, this is Stanley. And I thought, wow. And we spent the next 5 minutes, Stan trying courteously, because of his friend, to tell me in no uncertain words, kid, we're a very poor company. We can't afford to hire some kid for 2 months. It's just not in our budget. And when he started to say that, I fortunately jumped in and said, well, sir, honestly, I'm doing this for college credit and we're not allowed to ask for wages. Kid, you're hired. So I came into work as what we call a gopher. The name speaks for itself. It's go for this, go for that, go for whatever. Basically, you do what you're told, which is to go for things. And I worked there for 2 months and it was a lot of fun. And while I was working there, I started doing little bits of writing in addition to reading and script and editing and other things. When you're working as a gopher, you're doing everything, including things like go out, get coffee, read this issue. Is it any good? Edit this issue, file this issue, And it was a lot of fun. So I started submitting ideas, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Yeah, and the rest, as they say, obviously, is giant size X-Men and your beginning on what is... I don't want to be a bother. Does it tire you to only talk about the X-Men every interview?
No.
Okay, great. Because I wanted, obviously, to talk about that. Your work has been described by some critics as what we could have as the equivalent of the great American novel It's not my words. It's not my words. It's actually on Wikipedia.
Oh my goodness sakes. I've never heard it described as that.
I actually thought that was really interesting because you have this long-term format with the X-Men. You have this metaphor for some form of the human race, and especially the diversity.
Are you speaking of the X-Men in general or of my work?
Your work.
Oh,
your specific works. And these character-driven and character-centric plots, which include drama, humor, and romance. So it's really universal, and it encompasses a lot of themes and narratives. I wanted to obviously first start by asking you, how did you develop such a rich and wide tapestry?
One issue at a time? For me, the blunt answer is occasionally readers will come up and say, what do I think my favorite issue is? And my answer is always 94 to 279, page 11, which is when my run on the X-Men came to an end. To me, it's all one story. It's broken down into little bits. Some bits are one issue, one bits are two issues, one story, but it's all a coherent story because the characters don't change. They evolve, but it's the same group of people living their lives. And that to me is a single story. And from my perspective, the trick is to tell it as simply but effectively as I can and see how the audience reacts.
But you did take elements from reality, not precise elements exactly, but tonal elements of reality. And on the long run, we can see how the comics also mirrors the evolution of American society during the second half of the 20th century.
But isn't that writing? I mean, you're saying I take bits and pieces, but to me, every writer does that. You look at the world around you, you look at who these people are. The X-Men start to finish are people. They're not characters. No. I mean, the questions they face, the world they live in, it may seem perhaps different from the world we live in, but more than once I would get letters from readers saying, I know who that character is. That character is a lot like me. That the relationship they have with the people around them. To me, that's the natural state of their lives. Stan Lee's whole essence was you can play with the characters in the superhero universe that you're assigned for as long as you like. But you have to put them back the way you found them so the next person can start from that same basic place. The difference in my case is that I lasted 16 plus years and I was prepared to go another 16 if I could because I wanted to see what happened next. But I think that's what every writer does with every story they create and every character they create.
You're not wrong, but in the 1970s all the way to the 1990s, we know that the comic book format has sometimes been described as goofy. It's people in tights fighting aliens and saving the world from sometimes metaphoric, but most of the time it's actually cartoonish problems. You, along writers such as Jerry Conway or Len Wein, were described as one of the great reinventors in the way you shaped this mythology to make it more real, especially passing through the characters as actual people with actual problems you could relate to, which wasn't obviously the case in the 60s, if you follow my lead.
I would disagree. I think the X-Men, as presented by Roy Thomas and Neil Adams, were very much an attempt to present them as close to real people as they could, or as they felt like they could. We all approach them as we see them. Some writers do it emphasizing one direction. Some writers do it emphasizing another. That comes up to the person who's holding the pen. But again, the difference I found over that year was time. Most writers connect themselves with a team or a book for a fairly limited time. But in the 60s and early 70s, you did have those writers like Glenn and like Peter David, who took over a book and stayed with it. And the next step is you look at their work, you look at Jerry's work, and you say, okay, what do they do with it? What do they see in the character? What do they see in the stories? And you take it from there. I just, as I say, happen to stick around longer than everybody else.
How did you manage to stay relevant and inspired on such a long period of time, would you say? Because obviously in modern times, a 16, 17-year-long run, it's unheard of.
Well, you could just as easily ask, how does George R. Martin stay relevant with Game of Thrones? I mean, that's a challenge every writer faces. Every reality they create faces. To ask that of me is just as you could just as easily ask the readers, how do you feel? Make it's relevant to you. I just did signings here in France where readers, young men, young women, would come up and say how much these stories, these characters meant to them and help them get through difficult periods in their lives when they were growing up, when they were facing conflicts in those lives. I don't think that's something any writer, whether it's in the 60s, the 80s, the aughts, the teens, none of us set out to do that because that's too arrogant an approach. One wishes to tell a good story about real characters facing conflicts that are relevant to their lives, but the trick is to make their lives relevant to the readers. It's not, you don't approach them as saying, they are mutants. Woo! No, what matters is they're people with gifts, with ambitions, with conflicts, facing challenges. Yeah, they wear skin-tight costumes in comics. They wear more practical costumes when they're real costumes. But that's the reality of their life. It could just as easily, one could just as easily say they're police officers, they're fire folk, that they're lawyers. a job is a label of how they earn their living. But what matters is what happens when they're not per se doing that job, when they're living their life. Kitty Pryde was fun for me because she was barely starting with her life. She was barely starting her adolescence. She was in school. Yet at the same time, she faces this reality where an extraterrestrial creature kidnaps her and her friends and infects them with, her offspring. Well, here's a kid suddenly finding herself about to die horribly because she knows what she's up against. How does she face that? What comes next? How she learns to handle that is a step forward in her growing up. It's more melodramatic, perhaps, than an ordinary kid going to ordinary school. But who knows? Things happen. The reality is not so much that things happen, it is how one learns to deal with that. Positively, negatively, who knows? It's a question, and the answering of that question, yes, it comes in a 20-page format every 30 days, but the answering of the question is something that's relevant to all readers. Just see where you go.
Yeah, and on the differentiation, between the X-Men and some other superheroes is also this standpoint and discourse over diversity and persecutions. And yes, go ahead.
Well, so is life. Not, they're.
What do you mean?
The thing about mutants is they are it is forgive the phrase, an easy label, but it is a very accurate label about being an outsider, my father grabbed the family and took us over across the pond for what we thought was a brief visit. And the next thing we knew, he joined the U.S. Army and was basically on his way to becoming an American citizen. We didn't know, but there we were. And I remember going to school my first day, dressed as I would go to school in Britain. Shorts, tie, vest, blazer, knee socks, shoes. I came home from that day with a black eye and a bloody nose, and I never did it again because the kids in school saw this stranger as an outsider who was worth, hey, let's show him the reality of he wants to come over here. Okay, there's a price to be paid. It's a small lesson, but for me it was a very primal lesson about the do's and don'ts of being a stranger and a stranger kid in a strange land. My mother, we were at an army base in the South, and one of my father's colleagues, a doctor, came over to tell her that my father, also a doctor, was not going to be home that night because he had extra duty. And my mother, being English, just invited him in for coffee or a tea.
Yeah.
And he said, "No, ma'am, I won't." I was hiding in the back of the house because we had alligators in the backyard, and I wasn't going to get out of that chair, out of the door for anything. And she kept asking, "Well, no, come on in. What's the problem?" And he said, "Ma'am, you're white." And she didn't get it. He wasn't white. Yeah. Rare enough that he was a doctor, but to be a doctor of color was a big deal. But for him to go inside the white wife of a white colleague, you just didn't do that back then, especially down in Florida. These are things I'd never experienced. I mean, was an element of it perhaps in Britain, but not like that. So these memories stuck around for the next 10 years, 15 years, whatever, and became the foundation of what for me was what I put in the X-Men. Yeah. Not as a stereotype, because stereotypes are really easy. The trick is to take that what other people might appeal to, what would appear, to other people as a stereotype, and make a way to present it as a reality. You know, it was actually where I was going with this question. Obviously, since you started on the X-Men, a lot of time has passed, and the perception of being an outsider, or even the immigrant experience as a whole, has changed in the United States and in other parts of the world. I wanted to know what was, from experience, when you go and meet the fans, how did people approach this issue of the X-Men as an allegory and a metaphor of what you just described? Well, the fact that I'm working on my third generation, literally, of readers is perhaps one answer. But the fact that, as I said before, that people would come up and tell me of experiences in their own lives, how they were moved, it helped the book, helped them get through extremely hard times. That's an answer in and of itself. It's not something I tried to do or looked for, but to see it there is awesome. I mean, it happened just the other day. You know, not immense, but down in, forgive me, I have no brain anymore. No, that's okay. But that has to be treated with respect. The person has to be treated with respect. All of this, forgive me, has to be treated with respect. They're readers. They're not... I think I understand what you're saying, but I have actually a follow-up question to that. Okay. Given how many times you went to conventions or signings such as today, and you had a lot of exchanges with the public and the audience, obviously, did you sometimes go back to some of your works to look at them differently in regards to the conversation you might have had? Always. That always happens. Yeah. You know, as well as... my stock but legitimate answer is when they say, "What's your favorite book?" Well, my favorite book is the one I haven't written yet, because that's the unknown country. Once the book is written, once the book is published, that is then the property of the readers. Whether they love it, whether they don't love it, whether they think I've made a positive step or not so positive a step, that's their property to play with, to determine how I got there, where I'm going with it. That's fine. I am deeply appreciative of their response, but ambitiously, what I want to see, what I want to experience is what is over the next horizon.
Sure. Speaking of that, we've seen quite not exactly recently, but since the X-Men Legends comic book has arrived, it's an anthology from Marvel, the return of big creative names such as yourself to expand on the lore and mythos of the X-Men, but not only. I mean, Michelini came back to do more Venom. I think Peter David came back to do some Hulk again. Yourself, you came back quite a few times since then. How did that come to be? How did Marvel contact you or proposed you to go back to that volume of yours?
Phone rings, editor's on the other end of the line, says, "Do you want to do this?" I say yes.
There wasn't any more philosophical approach, like, do you want to explore some bits you might have left open in the past?
That comes after I say yes.
Yeah.
It's not that easy or that simple a discussion. Other writers have been playing in the sandbox over the last, let's face it, it's been 30 plus years since I stopped writing the X-Men on a consistent professional basis. So whatever I do clearly has to respect that work. So you find a story, one finds a story that rings a bell.
Yeah.
And one presents it to the editor, and then we see where it goes from there.
You're the one offering the ideas. They're not asking you, would you want to do a Gambit comics or?
No, I can write a Gambit. Do you want to write a Gambit comic? Always. Then I pitch an idea, and the editor and I talk about it. And if the editor likes it, it goes. I go on from there. If the editor doesn't like it, I start again. But that's the rule. That's the role that's played with every writer and every time it's asked. That question's asked.
Most of the time, it's comics that are meant to expand some of the shady parts of your own chronology. Like with Wolverine, we see what he does when he leaves the Outback and comes back. Do you have other ideas that would be more contemporary to add to what, like you described, has happened in between? Do you keep in touch with what's happening right now? What's happened since the last 10 years in X-Men comics?
You'll have to be more specific.
Like, did you read the Krakoan period from Jonathan Hickman?
Do you know the stories that have been going on?
I'm sorry for my English.
10, 12, 14, 15 years.
I
think the answer is there's so many of them. Some.
Yeah. It's not, there aren't that many hours in the day, and I have many other responsibilities.
Sure. I don't know if you know, but lately Marvel has allowed some of the writers to come back to your ideas. Especially, I'm thinking about Tim Seeley, who did a miniseries that explores Rogue during the Savage Land timeline. So, do you think of your work as some sort of fixture now that a new generation of writers, not only readers, but can explore and add their own apocryphal elements to it?
Well, you might as well ask Stan the same question. How does he feel about everybody in the 70s doing stuff about, with his... It's a very fluid landscape, and I think when any writer is writing a story reflective that's dancing through a predecessor's work, they have to look at it, or they should look at it, and see what fits, what doesn't, and where it goes from there. We're a fluid industry, and the key is making the story good. The key is, I think, I would write a story that derives from one of Stan's. I would want him to feel I had done a really good job, that I had respected his work, that I had built off his work, and I'd gone on from there. Because that's, I think, what we all do, or how we all feel. And that's where the ladder goes. And keep your fingers crossed.
Did some of his guys get in touch with you about using your characters, so to speak?
I've seen some books at conventions. I haven't. I mean, I've talked to some of them briefly. They're really great people. Had lovely conversations, but it's, we're scattered all over the world sometimes, so it's not as easy as it sounds. Yeah.
You were talking earlier about what the most interesting thing is the next book. And in the same way that I think John Byrne did his own version of the canon, hypocritical canon, obviously, on the side. Should you be allowed to come back to the mainline X-Men comics nowadays, do you think, what do you think you would do, or you would add, or you would expand to the things that you've already done?
I guess the first aspect of that answer would be, it's not that simple a question, because saying what would I do isn't the way that's done now, because it's what I do in conjunction with the editor, and it's a synergistic mix, because everything has to fit together. Not simply that one X-Men book fits with another X-Men book, but the X-Men books have to fit with the FF books. And that's I'll let you know when I get there.
Okay.
Because I'll let you know when I get there.
You don't see something that's scratching the back of your head, like, I need to speak about that?
When I wrote God Loves Man Kills, that was going to be it. That would be, if you only read that, if you only had one X-Men to read, that would be it. Except, in the early aughts when I was doing Extreme and working with Igor Corday, I suddenly had this idea, and out came a 5-part story of the Extreme team, and the villain, who was a priest, or actually he was a minister, breaking out of prison and wanting to continue his mission and his evolution with meeting an AI entity who saw himself as a minister. And together, the two of them, through their interaction primarily with Kitty, but also with the X-Men, came to a realization that being a traditional villain, which is how he was portrayed up to that point, it didn't it didn't work because at the same time they both realized they were ministers of God. And you can't play one with the other. And so at the end of the story, what had been the villain of the first of God Loves, Man Kills found himself evolving into becoming a true minister. And he had to find out where that would lead before he could take the next step, whether it be become a minister for real or become a villain for real. And that was me trying to answer what I felt was a legitimate question in my head. I suppose if someday the opportunity arose for me to ask and answer the third level of that, what happens next? I'd give it a shot. But from my perspective, that's a writer's question. It's not a superhero question. It's not a Marvel question. It's not an X-Men question. It's like, here are characters, here are people, not characters, here are people living their lives. What happens next? Well, welcome to the world of a writer.
And that's actually a next segue into my final question. I'm going to release you now. You mentioned the AI entity, you mentioned what happens next, and you mentioned the writer. I do have a question which we ask usually when you have writers or artists in regards to the matter of artificial intelligence and the generation of texts and pictures. Obviously, I'm sure you have an opinion on that. Do you feel that yourself, who lived your whole life as a writer, as a professional writer for comics and other forms of media, do you think it's a danger? Do you think it's an evolution? Do you think it's a tool?
What, AI?
Yeah.
It's...
You can be honest here.
No, I'm not. I'm just... I've been telling stories for 55 years, which is, just to think about that in those terms, is terrifying. Yeah. But they're my stories. If an AI wants to come along and tell stories, I guess the question I would ask, what are they based on? An AI is the sum and substance of, forgive me, him, her, its programming, just like we are the sum and substance of our programming, but that's life. Life is our programming. It's sitting here talking with you. Are those two elements, they may be similar. Are they the same? Can one actually say that an AI is a person, is a reality in and of itself? I mean, I've written AI characters. I have a villain that I really would love to play with, who was originally created as an AI. If it works, it works. If it doesn't work, it doesn't work. If an artificial intelligence has... No, it's... I pause because I'm trying to find the right way to present this, but part of me feels if one has an entity who is considered quote unquote artificial, yet is intelligent, why is it artificial? It's just not human, or it's not organic. So what? It's not that simple or that easy a Q&A. And
I'm not asking you if you're for or against it. I mean,
No. But what I'm saying is that it's more easy to present as a cliche. Ask me in 10 years when it's evolved another step or two, or we've all, we're all running away from Arnold Schwarzenegger, who I gather will not be in the next.
Probably not.
I just saw it on, it's, what is, I think my ambition is very simple and very plain. I want to write good stories. I want, hopefully, to find a publisher to sell the good stories and to find an audience that will read the good stories and enjoy them. If that happens, hoorah. If it doesn't happen, keep trying till I get it right. But I think that's the struggle that every writer faces, and every artist. So,
All right, and we can
good luck.
What we can control.
That'll take us another hour.
Thanks a lot, Chris Claremont. So in 10 years, maybe you, me, and Schwarzenegger for another interview. Thanks a lot for answering my questions, and I hope you have a good signing.
You and me both.